Hi everyone. Lately I have been wondering what it will be like adjusting when we return to normal. And then I ask myself, what will be the new normal? It feels like it will be very, very different. Hi everyone, I'm Andy Asher. I'm editor over here at bloomerboomer.com. Now today we are talking about the psychological impact of isolation and the fears associated with COVID-19 and how we will adjust to normalcy. Now to help out, I have asked a neuropsychologist, Dr. Wilfred van Gorp, to join us. We'll talk about ways people will be able to adjust to the life following the pandemic, how things will be different, how we can chart a path back to connecting with others and taking care of our mental health. Big questions and difficult answers. Now, you should be able to participate if you're watching on Facebook, and we also play on YouTube. Other live shows this week: Forbes calls Nancy Schenker a bad girl because she selectively breaks rules and takes calculated risks to help companies to innovate and to grow. That'll be tomorrow. And then on Friday, Dr. Nicole Benjamin Fink, founder of Conservation Beyond Borders, and poses the question: is COVID-19 a direct spillover of the illegal wildlife trade? So like us on Facebook and we'll notify you about the next shows. And as always, there's some virtual reality in the background here, okay? To improve my cognitive functioning, I need all I can get. And I have a new game. I'm really intrigued. It's called Journey, which is intentionally abstract and mysterious with a sense of wonderment. It's new to me. We will explore together. And with that, let's get started. And remember, I love marmalade. Dr. Gorp, it's great having you here, and thanks so much. I'm really excited to talk to you a little bit about all this, and I want to ask you what I ask all my guests, and how are you coping, and how are you doing under the circumstances now in which we live today?
Hi, Andy. Thanks a lot, and pleasure to be with you. Boy, it's challenging because, to me, well, there are two things to me in my own coping. One is the uncertainty as to when is this going to end, when will we gradually be able to resume regular activities, and also the issue of uncertainty and being isolated. My computer lists when I backed it up last, and I backed it up when I was in New York, and then I came to Chicago and decided to stay at my home in Chicago till things look better in New York. And it keeps every day telling me this is now day 66, you haven't backed it up. So I know that I've been home 66 days. It's just a continual reminder of sort of the isolation and all that. So I'm coping fine, but it's not without challenges.
Indeed it is. And now, so you are a neuropsychologist. I'm not entirely sure what that is. Can you help me with it a little bit?
Sure thing. I'm both a clinical psychologist and a neuropsychologist. So when I wear my neuropsychologist hat, I evaluate people for things like learning disabilities, maybe traumatic brain injury, issues about brain and behavior. So that's where we administer tests to people like IQ tests or personality tests. Clinical psychology, I work with people on things like coping with COVID-19. I did work back in 9/11, first responders. So it can it's a broad field. I'm a psychologist, but I do specialize in issues like learning disability, ADHD, things like that.
Now, everyone is making adjustments like, we never thought we would, but what do you see are the ways that people will adjust to life, following the pandemic?
Well, that's a tough question, and
It
in part requires a crystal ball. But let's just start let's just start with a couple of psychological principles about people's coping now, because that's going to predict how they do as we come out of this. Um, One of the key rules of thumb in psychology is that change equals stress. Any change in our life equals stress. I'll give you an example on a famous scale of stress. Christmas is one of the highest rated things because it's a change. It requires us to alter our schedule. Well, this is that level of stress on steroids. So, how are people going to cope? Some people will have suspicion as to, is it really over? Is it not? What's going to happen next? There could be another calamity happen. If this happened, what else could happen? So people are going to be on edge. They're going to be hyper vigilant. They're going to be a little jumpy. These are just normal reactions. Sometimes people who've been depressed during this episode by being cooped up, people do get depressed, for example, not only with isolation, but with lack of exercise. And here the gyms are closed, gyms in many apartment, condo buildings are closed. So people may develop some sadness and prolonged depression. So we're going to have that to do as people come out of this. The hope is people might see it as a challenge to reinvent themselves, reinvent ways of doing things. That's on the positive. But some people are going to be traumatized by this. Post-traumatic stress disorder. It's estimated that 25 to 40% of frontline workers are going to come out of this with PTSD. And I think regular people are at greater risk for some degree of being emotionally traumatized by this.
You know, and so I wonder how we can chart a path back to connecting with others, and then, of course, in the meantime, taking care of our mental health.
Well, the nice thing is that people have learned to use FaceTime, Zoom, and other platforms. That's really good. And I think people will now be accustomed to keeping that up to some extent, particularly if, let's say, somebody is either medically ill or in a nursing home or has limited mobility. They've learned now to rely on Zoom. They've learned to rely on FaceTime, so forth. But people then are going to slowly get out. But what's that going to be like, Andy? People are going to be afraid to be physically close to each other. They're going to be afraid to go to a large restaurant. Certainly, they're going to be terrified to go to a sporting event where it's crowded. That's going to require a lot of adjustment. So people are going to have to ease back into life and think of maybe new ways of doing things.
Yeah.
Maybe the handshake's not going to be there anymore. I don't know.
Yeah. You know, I'm reminded of the Albert Camus novel, you know, The Plague is scary and it's extreme, but I still wonder about how prescient it is for today.
Absolutely. This, certainly in my lifetime, I've never lived through anything like this, and I lived in New York during 9/11, and this outpaces that by a long shot. It's going to require, the good thing is most people are psychologically healthy. The majority of people do have coping strategies, and they're just going to need to rely on their coping strategies as they come out of this to adapt back to life.
Yeah. And it gives us a strong reminder of the unpredictability of life, doesn't it?
That's right. And it not only reminds us of that, but I think it's going to make people cautious as they come out of this, because they are going to wonder what's next, what other plagues around the corner.
Yeah, that 2011 movie Contagion by Steven Soderbergh provided a more modern warning about the precariousness of the human condition. Certainly,
it's no accident that it's trending as one of the top movies on Netflix. And I watched it the other day myself. It's interesting. I went into a store the other day in Chicago, and it was surreal. There was no one in it. There were no cashiers. Everyone had to use the electronic machines to check out. Many of the counters had been closed. I felt like I was an extra in a movie.
Yeah, that surreal feeling I got last weekend when I was driving in the downtown area, and the roads were virtually empty. It's something that we just never could have imagined, in just subtle ways.
Right. And and to then get back to your sort of theme here, what's it going to be like after this begins to abate, or things begin to reopen? And I think, like the turtle coming out of its shell, people are going to be very cautious. They're going to explore outside gradually. They're going to be tentative. And that's why I think psychologically I'm encouraging a lot of people, just keep using Zoom. Keep doing that. Keep using FaceTime, whatever video platform you have. Keep that up, because we're going to need some supports while people merge back into reality.
That's true, kind of gradual, and then when the crisis subsides, will we go back to normal? Will we even want to, or does COVID-19 provide us with an important learning experience, which I think it certainly does?
I think it does too. I also think, we're talking about when sort of people emerge and when this pandemic is over. Um, it could be 2 years before there's a widely available vaccine. That some people opine that. What if this goes on for a long time? People are then they're really going to have to work on getting adjusted back.
That's for sure. And our response to the pandemic will just have an enormous effect on the future of humankind. More than anything, the coronavirus has highlighted the existing political, economic, and social dysfunctionalities. It has also shown the crisis of leadership. It's an invitation to make radical changes to the economy, our social behavior, and the role of government in our lives.
Absolutely. I think people have realized what role a government can play, who maybe in the past just weren't interested, didn't care. I think people are now perking up and are watching more, are more informed, a little more vigilant on that. But it's hard for people to plan. The theme kind of here is, how are we going to adapt when we come back to reality? Although the new reality is going to be very different. I think post-COVID, it's a different world, just like it was a different world after 9/11 compared to before 9/11.
Yeah.
And it's going to require rethinking on a lot of people's parts. I think of a friend of mine, Daniel Hume, who has a restaurant in New York, 11 Madison Park, and he said, he doesn't imagine opening a restaurant now in the future like he did before. And he said he's having to rethink the whole thing. He's having to rethink the whole design of a restaurant, the landscape, the social function of a restaurant. It's, in some ways, a lot of this, Andy, is going to be a blank canvas. And the creative people in the world will see it as an opportunity. Many of the others of us who are not so creative, we're going to really be challenged. We got to adapt.
Yeah. I almost view restaurants as something of a barometer of how we're going to transition, because they're so acutely affected by this, and seemingly will be for a while.
And they really play such an important role in our society in terms of sociability, social functioning, our relating to other people. They play a very important role. And just like, for example, schools for children, that they play an important role not only to impart knowledge, but for social development of children, socialization. And if every kid's having to be homeschooled or obtain their education by video, that socialization is going to be missing. And that's going to be a real challenge, because now they're in their formative years. Child is, say, 6 years old, maybe 7. If they miss a couple of years really social development, that's also going to have an impact. And I haven't heard people talk about that too much.
You talk about a barometer. The schools are really it, because if kids aren't getting back to school by fall, um, parents have to stay home. I mean, it's a an effect that's going to go on all through their household.
Parents have to stay home, and the other issue with that is if parents sort of serve as the teacher in a homeschooling environment, the parent can no longer behave like mom or dad. They're now the teacher, and the teacher is sometimes a little more critical. The teacher has to correct the child. The teacher has to let the child know when they're failing or when they're not really achieving properly. And it puts the parent in a difficult role because the child doesn't see them as mommy, they see them as the teacher, and that can cause a problem.
Yeah. Well, this has been really interesting. Do you have any maybe random thoughts on, and we've talked about a little bit on what life might be like after the pandemic?
I think the biggest change is going to be in socialization, how people relate to each other. I think people are going to use technology a lot more to communicate. There will be a lot more Zoom cocktail hours, even after this is over. People are going to learn new ways of socializing, and that's going to continue even after this is long gone.
Yeah. If people want to learn more about you and your work, and how can they go about doing that?
Well, they can go to my website, which is cognitive-assessment.com. www.cognitive-assessment.com.
All right, and let me ask you this: this as we wind down here, how did you enjoy this format? It's probably a little different for interviews that you've done in the past, but did you get everything out there that you wanted to talk about today?
I did. I enjoyed this format a lot. I'll just free associate briefly to relate to your question. 98% of our evaluations now are by telehealth. We evaluate people by giving them tests. Now we're doing it by video, which is a radically different approach. So I enjoyed this format with you, and it's sort of a little taste of what our patients go through now with video telehealth evaluations.
Yes, that certainly is the case. Well, thank you so much. And as for today's adventure of journey, is profound, or at least it can be. It's an interactive parable, the story of a lone traveler and their path through life, told in the form of a voyage that starts in the vast expanses of the desert, which you can see up here, and how it ends. Well, that would spoil it all, but we will work on that. And again, Dr. Wilfred van Gorp, you've been fantastic, and you can watch the replay on Facebook and YouTube, and on Bloomer, if I could say it, bloomerboomer.com. And I love marmalade.